we're diving into a really interesting new paper from Zhejiang University and ByteDance. It's called ThinkRL-Edit, Thinking in Reinforcement Learning for Reasoning-Centric Image Editing.
And the core of this research, it gets at a fundamental weakness in current image generation models. Even the ones using reinforcement learning, they just really struggle with edits that require deep logic.
Right. Any kind of sophisticated semantic reasoning, they're kind of stuck exploring the pixel space, what the authors call denoising stochasticity.
Exactly. And their answer is this new approach, ThinkRL-Edit. And for the quick overview, the solution is built on a few key ideas. First, they explicitly decouple the visual reasoning from the actual image synthesis, and they do that using chain of thought planning.
Then second, they stabilize the reward signal. VLM scores can be, notoriously inconsistent, so they replace those with a much more precise binary checklist evaluation.
And third, they tackle a classic RL problem, which is reward aggregation bias. They introduce something called unbiased chain preference grouping, or UCPG, which holistically ranks these reasoning chains. It looks at fidelity, quality, and consistency all at once, so trivial solutions don't skew the learning.
And the result is a pretty significant leap forward. ThinkRL-Edit gets state-of-the-art performance. It boosts the instruction following score on the quiz bench by, over 14 points?
Yeah, an impressive plus 14.62. It really makes reasoning a, quote, first-class objective for the model.
That sets the stage perfectly. So before we get into the technical mechanics of it all, let's just nail down what this problem really looks like. For an engineer using these models, what exactly is a reasoning-centric edit that standard models just fall over on?
Well, it really boils down to any edit that needs a thorough semantic understanding and, crucially, a multi-step logical plan before the first pixel is even diffused.
So not just making a photo look nicer?
No, not at all. If you just want aesthetic enhancement or, swapping one simple object for another, standard models are usually fine.
Mm-hmm.
But they fail pretty much instantly when you introduce complex logic, context, or external knowledge.
Can you give us some of the concrete examples from the paper? I think the visual stuff really helps make this tangible.
Absolutely. So think about procedural constraints. One of their examples requires generating an image, stacking 4 cubes, red, green, blue, and white.
Okay.
But, and this is the key, they have to be stacked precisely from bottom to top in that specific order. That's procedural reasoning. It's based on spatial constraints.
That's tough, because the model doesn't just need to know what a stack of cubes looks like. It has to understand bottom to top and then map 4 different attributes into a logical sequence.
Exactly right. Or think about semantic knowledge retrieval.
Mm-hmm.
An instruction might be to change an animal in a picture to China's most famous national treasure animal.
So it has to figure out that means panda first.
It has to retrieve that concept panda and then execute the visual edit in a way that looks plausible. Another one they used involved abstract reasoning, like continuing a geometric pattern based on a set of visual rules.
That really highlights the difference, doesn't it? It's not just generating a visually plausible image. It's about generating a logically correct one. And this is where prior RL methods like FlowGRPO, they just hit a wall.
Yeah, precisely. Those methods, their exploration is kind of restricted to the randomness within the denoising process itself. They're great at refining the, let's say, the visual quality of the final output, but they are fundamentally insufficient for the planning and interpretation you need for these reasoning tasks.
The paper was really clear about the 3 main pain points for these older RL approaches. Let's maybe list those out again, and then we can dig into how ThinkRL-Edit solves each one.
Okay, so the 3 big challenges. First, limited reasoning exploration. The policy is only searching within that denoising noise, completely ignoring the huge space of different semantic reasoning paths it could take.
And second, biased reward aggregation. This is where you just, weight and sum your rewards. Consistency, fidelity, quality, and it makes you vulnerable to these weird edge cases.
This is the classic RL failure mode, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
The model just finds the path of least resistance.
Totally. It maximizes visual consistency by just, barely changing the original image, even if that means completely ignoring the complex instruction.
And the correct edit, the one that actually followed the instruction, might get a slightly lower consistency score because it had to make a bigger change. So the weighted sum unfairly penalizes it.
Exactly. What was the third challenge?
The third one was unstable instruction rewards. Previous work relied on vision language models, VLMs, to give these subjective scores, usually like a 1 to 5 rating.
Right.
For these really nuanced reasoning tasks, that signal is just inherently high variance, it's inconsistent, and ultimately just makes the policy updates noisy and unreliable.
Okay, so let's look at the fix for that first problem, the limited exploration. The core idea is separating the reasoning path from the image generation. How does ThinkRL-Edit actually implement this thinking process with chain of thought sampling?
So they integrate this COT-based reasoning sampling right into the training loop, and it forces that semantic exploration. The key is that they introduce an explicit understanding module, which they call OPNO, that's trained separately from the generation component.
So the model literally has to think through the instruction first. What does that sequence look like during sampling?
It's a two-stage loop. First, the understanding module does what they call planning. It looks at the image, it looks at the instruction, and it generates a reasoning-enhanced prompt. Let's call it $2. This prompt basically outlines the semantic steps needed.
That's the proactive reasoning part, but you said it's a loop, so there's a feedback mechanism, right?
Yes, the second stage is reflection. The generation module takes that plan and creates a visual sample. Then, and this is the important part, the understanding module provides feedback, checks on that result. That feedback is then concatenated with the previous reasoning and fed back into the next sampling stage.
So it forces the model to explore multiple hypotheses and check if the plan is even plausible before it commits to a final image.
Exactly. It's a really smart design. It establishes a correct semantic pathway as a prerequisite for diffusion. It's actively optimizing for different reasoning trajectories, not just hoping good reasoning pops out of random pixel changes.
Which tackles that limited exploration problem head on. Okay, let's pivot. How did they make sure the rewards guiding this whole process were both stable and unbiased?
Let's start with stability. They went after the problem of those subjective 1 to 5 VLM scores by creating this fine-grained checklist evaluation.
And why are those traditional Staler scores so noisy for reasoning tasks in the first place?
Well, you're asking the VLM for a subjective rating across a really ambiguous spectrum. If the instruction is, say, stack the blocks red, green, blue, a 4 out of 5 rating doesn't tell you what went wrong.
Right. Was the order wrong? Was a color off? You have no idea.
Yeah, you can't backpropagate from that reliably. So the checklist is the solution. Instead of one subjective score, they use a model like Gemini to generate a list of simple, binary yes or no questions based on the instruction.
So for the block example, it would ask things like, is the red block at the bottom? Yes, no. Is the blue block directly above the green block? Yes, no.
Precisely. And that dramatically improves both precision and interpretability. The VLM just answers these binary questions, and the final alignment score is just the percentage of yes answers. It gives you a much lower variance, much more accurate reward.
Okay, that solves the stability problem. Now for the bias. How does this unbiased chain preference grouping, the UCPG, stop the model from collapsing into those lazy, minimal edit solutions?
Well, the core issue, as we said, was collapsing everything into a single average score. If consistency is always high for tiny edits, that single score just biases the model away from making the big semantic leap it needs to.
So UCPG avoids that collapse.
It does. I mean, think of it like a decathlon. You don't just add up all the raw times and distances to rank the athletes, right? UCPG doesn't collapse the rewards. It keeps them separate. And it jointly sorts all the sample chains across all the reward dimensions to build a total order of candidates.
So it's not about acing one event. It's about having a high global rank across all the criteria at the same time.
Exactly. Gradient updates are then only calculated from the chains that maintain that consistent global ranking. It forces the system to learn a unified preference. And it stops the policy from overfitting to, say, high consistency scores that just come from doing nothing.
Okay, let's touch on the architecture. The base model is QuIN-Edit. Can you walk us through the optimization structure, maybe without getting too deep into the mathematical notation?
Sure. The training uses what they call decoupled ungen optimization. So you have two main components, the understanding component and the generation component.
And they're optimized together.
Jointly, yes, but their updates are decoupled. So you're separately optimizing the reasoning path and the synthesis path, but they're both using the same advantage calculated from that holistic UCPG signal.
So in simpler terms, you're tuning the planner and the image generator at the same time, using that same robust feedback loop from the UCPG ranking.
That's the high-level picture. For our more technical listeners, they noted a few specifics. They used a group size of 128, batch size of 4, and the rewards were computed using QuIN3VL. Also, critically, they used FSTP and gradient checkpointing to keep memory usage down.
Which you have to do with these massive models. Okay, let's get to the results because the numbers really show that this focus on reasoning paid off, starting with Kriyash's bench.
Right, and Chris Bench is designed specifically to test these kinds of categorized editing tasks, factual, conceptual, procedural knowledge. Here, ThinkRL-Edit achieved state-of-the-art results. It moved the instruction-following score from the QuenEdit baseline of 56.54 all the way up to 71.1C.
That's a huge jump, over 14 points.
It's monumental in this space, yeah. And the breakdown showed the gains were really pronounced in the areas that demand complex thought. Things like attribute perception, social science, natural science, and conceptual knowledge. That tells you the reasoning module is really doing its job.
It's not just a general lift.
Not at all. And then they tested generalization on Rise Bench. This one has out-of-domain reasoning tasks, temporal, causal, spatial, that kind of thing.
And if the model had just overfit to Chris Bench, it would do poorly here. What did the data show?
It showed a massive jump. ThinkRL-Edit boosted the overall reasoning score from the baseline of 37.2 to 61.7. That's a plus 24.5 point gain. It proves the system is actually learning underlying principles of logic that can generalize.
Very impressive. And what about people? How did humans judge the images?
The user study was pretty decisive. It confirmed human preference alignment across the board. For the core metric, instruction following, users prefer the ThinkRL-Edit output nearly 80% of the time.
79.36%, yeah. So the complex reward structure actually maps to what humans think is correct.
It does. It validates the whole approach.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the ablation studies. This is often the most telling part because it shows if each piece of the puzzle was actually necessary. Did adding planning and reflection prove their worth?
Yes, step by step. Just adding the understanding module gave a big initial boost. Then adding planning on top of that improved the score again.
Yeah.
And then adding reflection improved it even further. It just confirms the value of that explicit COT structure.
And what about the checklist versus the old 1 to 5 rating?
The checklist delivered a significantly higher instruction following score. It really verifies that using those targeted binary questions gives you a much cleaner learning signal.
Let's focus on that UCPG ablation again. We hypothesized that simple weighted averaging encourages the model to cheat. Did the data back that up?
It absolutely did. The weighted average model showed statistically higher visual consistency scores, but lower instruction following scores compared to UCPG.
So it was overfitting to consistency.
Exactly. It was making the image look good and close to the original, but at the expense of actually following the instructions. UCPG successfully fixed that bias.
So to wrap up the breakthrough here, the authors have shown how effective it is to treat reasoning as a first-class objective. You force the model to plan, you check that plan with a stable reward, and you make sure the learning isn't biased.
Right. They achieved stable, interpretable, and semantically grounded policy updates. It really moves image editing from just pure synthesis to true intelligent execution.
Now, despite these huge leaps, the paper was very honest about a practical limitation. The linguistic chain of thought, while it helps interpretability, it adds a lot of time overhead.
That's the bottleneck, yeah. Having the model generate and process all those text descriptions, it nearly doubles the editing time. That's a big hurdle for any kind of real-time application.
Which brings us right to the future direction they suggested to solve this latency problem.
The next big step is to explore latent Cauchy representations. So this would mean moving the entire chain of thought reasoning process out of the linguistic space. Instead of generating text, you'd encode the multimodal reasoning directly into the latent space of the model itself.
So you'd get rid of all the redundant linguistic descriptions and extra processing steps. It would bridge the gap between understanding and generation much more efficiently.
Exactly. This latent approach could pave the way for much faster, more visually grounded reasoning. And it leaves you with a really fascinating question to think about.
What's that?
If the model is executing these complex reasoning steps entirely internally, with no external text to trace, how deep can that latent logic become before we, as the observers, completely lose the ability to understand its thought process?